The invitation. The Zarathian dominion prided itself on strength. They were a race of towering, armored warriors, their biology engineered for battle over millennia. Their empire had never known defeat, and their war fleets patrolled the galaxy unchallenged. To them, power was measured in raw force, and those without it were insignificant. That was why the Galactic Military Summit, held aboard the Zarathian warship Unbreakable Honor, was a spectacle of dominance. The most powerful species of the galaxy had gathered, each showcasing their military prowess. The Jorvans, with their massive war beasts. The Velker, whose energy-based weapons could level planets. And of course, the Zarathians themselves, standing at the front of the Grand Hall, towering over all. The humans, however, sat in the back. No one had told them to. No seating chart had dictated their place. But when the human delegation arrived, they had quietly walked past the proud warriors, past the dignitaries eager to claim the best spots, and taken seats near the rear of the massive hall. To the other species, it was a sign of submission. Typical, muttered General Karath, a hulking Zarathian clad in ceremonial battle armor. The weak know their place. Ambassador Viratel of the Velker race, her 4 glowing eyes flashing with curiosity, tilted her head. It is strange, though. Humanity is young, but not entirely unimpressive. Their tactics in the Ikran conflict were efficient, yet they do not even claim their seat at the front. Because they are cowards, Karath scoffed. Down in the back rows, the humans exchanged amused glances. Colonel Ethan Graves leaned toward Captain Ramirez, his second in command. They think we sat back here because we're afraid. Ramirez smirked. Let him think it. Graves scanned the Grand Hall, taking in every detail. The Zarathians, as expected, stood at the very front, eager to be the center of attention. The other warrior races crowded in close, each species trying to assert dominance through presence alone. No one was watching their surroundings. No one was watching the exits. Graves' eyes flicked to the security teams stationed along the walls. Elite Zarathian guards, powerful but arrogant, standing rigid in ceremonial armor. Too rigid. He nudged Ramirez and subtly pointed at their weapons. Safety's still on, she muttered under her breath. Amateurs. The summit commenced with grand displays of power. The Zarathians boasted about their war fleet's latest advancements. The Jorvans unleashed a controlled battle simulation, showcasing their devastating ground forces. The Velker demonstrated their orbital precision strikes, annihilating a mock asteroid belt with ease. The humans? They watched. They observed. They waited. Then the alarms blared. A deep, rumbling explosion shook the warship, cutting through the posturing and boasts. Red emergency lights bathed the room in an eerie glow as the voice of the ship's AI boomed overhead. Alert! Unidentified hostile forces have breached the perimeter. All personnel, prepare for engagement. For a split second, there was silence. Then chaos. The front rows, packed with the so-called strongest warriors of the galaxy, became a battleground as Dravik's swarm warriors, the galaxy's most ruthless invaders, burst through the bulkheads. The Draviks were insectoid horrors, their chitinous armor resistant to standard ballistics. Their weapons were organic, firing acidic projectiles that melted through armor in seconds. They had targeted the summit's high-value delegates, expecting a swift and overwhelming victory. The Zarathians, Velker, and Jorvans roared in fury and charged, but they had been caught off guard. Their weapons were holstered for ceremony, their armor more decorative than functional. In seconds, the battlefield shifted against them, but in the back where the humans sat, they were already moving. Eyes up, Graves said, voice calm, controlled. Weapons free. Without hesitation, the human delegation sprang into action. From beneath their uniforms, compact, hidden firearms were drawn. Small but powerful. Where the other species fought with brute force, the humans fought with precision. Short, controlled bursts took down the first wave of Draviks before they even realized what was happening. The back of the hall, once dismissed as an unimportant position, had suddenly become the most fortified. One of the Zarathian commanders, wounded and scrambling for cover, turned to see the humans coordinating, calling out enemy positions, covering angles, moving like a well-rehearsed unit. How? He started, but a Dravix warrior lunged toward him, only to be dropped instantly by a single, well-placed human shot. Graves glanced at the Zarathian and smirked. Now you know why we sit in the back. The ambush. The Grand Hall of the Zarathian warship had been a place of power and diplomacy just moments ago. Now it was a battleground. The Dravix swarm had struck with precision. Their warriors, clad in hardened chitin armor, poured through the breached bulkheads, weapons hissing as they fired streams of acidic projectiles. Screams echoed through the chamber as the once mighty warriors of the galaxy's strongest species scrambled for cover, their arrogance shattered in an instant. General Karath of the Zarathians roared, his massive fists crushing the skull of a Dravix invader. But for everyone he killed, 3 more surged forward. The front of the hall, where the galaxy's most powerful species had gathered, was a bloodbath. The Jorvan's war beasts thrashed wildly, but were overwhelmed. The Velkur, masters of energy weapons, had no time to charge their advanced rifles before they were cut down. The Dravix had planned for them, but they had not planned for the humans. At the back of the hall, the human delegation was in control. Colonel Ethan Graves pressed his back against a reinforced pillar, firing short, controlled bursts from his concealed firearm. Each shot found its mark, punching through the weak points in the Dravix's organic armor. Ramirez, status? Graves called. Captain Ramirez reloaded swiftly, barely glancing at her weapon. We got a dozen down, more pushing forward. But they don't know how to deal with organized resistance. They were expecting a stampede, not a firing line. The other species had panicked, their formations breaking in the face of the surprise attack. But the humans? They had expected this. No one had told them an ambush was coming. They hadn't intercepted any transmissions or spotted an obvious threat. But they had known. Graves had seen it in the security details, too rigid, too ceremonial. Ramirez had noted the lack of proper defensive measures in the hall's layout. Every human in the delegation had sensed the tension, the feeling that something wasn't right. So, when the attack began, they had already been ready. Suppressing fire, Ramirez ordered, and the humans responded instantly. A burst of coordinated gunfire erupted from the back rows, catching the Dravix off guard. The invaders had focused their assault on the front of the hall, believing the strongest warriors would be the greatest threat. They had ignored the humans. A fatal mistake. Graves spotted a group of Zarathian guards pinned down behind an overturned table, their ceremonial weapons useless against the Dravix onslaught. Their leader, a young officer, looked up in shock as a group of humans rushed past them, weapons raised, moving with precise, lethal efficiency. A Dravix warrior leapt forward, its clawed appendages raised to strike. A single human shot punched through its skull, dropping it instantly. The Zarathian officer stared, wide-eyed. You. Graves didn't slow down. Stay down. Let's handle this. Humans weren't the biggest, the strongest, or the most technologically advanced species in the galaxy. But they were the most adaptable. They fought smart. They positioned themselves where the advantage was theirs. That was why they had chosen the back of the room. Not because they were afraid. Because they had the best vantage point. Because from the back, they could see everything. The battle shifted as more Dravix poured in. They were learning, adapting to the resistance. They moved smarter, taking cover, their acidic weapons forcing the humans into tighter formations. A nearby explosion sent Graves sprawling. His ears rang, his vision blurred. A Dravix warrior loomed over him, its bladed limbs raised. A shot rang out, and the Dravix collapsed, a bullet through its eye socket. Ramirez hauled Graves to his feet. You good? He nodded, shaking off the disorientation. Time to push forward. The humans didn't just hold the line. They advanced. Using cover, using tactics, they turned the back of the hall into a stronghold, cutting down Dravix forces with ruthless precision. The other species, seeing this, began to rally. The Zarathians, bruised but furious, took up defensive positions behind the humans. The Velkur, their weapons finally charged, provided supporting fire. The Jorvans used their war beasts to block off key entry points. What had started as a massacre had turned into a counterattack. The Draviks, once so confident, began to fall back. Their surprise advantage had been shattered, their momentum broken. They had expected a show of brute strength, not a strategic response. They had assumed the strongest species in the galaxy sat at the front. They had never considered that the most dangerous ones sat in the back. As the last of the Draviks' forces retreated, leaving behind piles of their dead, silence settled over the hall. The Zarathians and other warriors looked at the humans, really looked at them, for the first time. Graves exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Well, that was fun, Ramirez smirked. But they're wondering why we sat back here now. The Zarathian general stepped forward, his armor dented, his pride wounded. His eyes, however, held something new. Respect, and maybe just a little fear. Tactical superiority. The battle wasn't over. Though the Draviks had retreated from the Grand Hall, they weren't fleeing. They were regrouping. Graves knew it. The humans knew it. The only question was how long they had before the next wave came. General Karath of the Zarathians stood among his wounded soldiers, his massive frame heaving with exertion. His pride had taken nearly as much damage as his forces. He turned toward Graves, his eyes burning with barely contained frustration. "You planned for this," Karath said, his voice low and dangerous. Graves didn't blink. "We prepared for the possibility." Karath's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. He didn't have to. The other species were watching. The Jorvans, the Velker, all of them had seen what had just happened. They had seen who had taken control when everything fell apart. The humans had expected an attack. The warriors at the front? They had not. "Status," Graves ordered, ignoring Karath's glare. Ramirez was already on it. "We've sealed the bulkheads to this chamber, bought ourselves time. But they're not done. We intercepted their comms, reinforcements inbound, probably from another breach point." Graves exhaled slowly. "How many?" "Too many for a straight fight," she admitted. "They'll hit us from multiple angles, cut us off, force us into a war of attrition. We're inside their trap now. Trapped, outnumbered, fighting aboard a warship not their own. Bad odds. But humans had never needed good odds, just a plan." Graves turned to the other species. "Listen up. We don't have time for pride or wounded egos. If we hold here, we die. We need to take control of the ship's defense systems. That means securing the command deck." Karath bristled. "The command deck is ours to defend." Graves gestured toward the Zarathian dead littering the hall. "You were defending this room too. How'd that work out?" Karath's fists clenched. Every instinct told him to crush the insolent human, but logic held him back. He had just seen his people overrun and outmaneuvered. The humans? They had turned the tide. For the first time in his life, Karath swallowed his pride. "Fine. What's your plan?" Graves smirked. "Progress. The advance." With the humans leading, the survivors moved through the warship corridors, leaving the Grand Hall behind. The other species fought with raw aggression, but the humans fought with efficiency. The Jorvans pushed forward, their heavy war beasts acting as mobile shields. The Velker provided long-range precision fire, eliminating threats before they could react. The Zarathians, still fuming from their earlier failure, fought harder than ever, determined to prove themselves. And the humans? They orchestrated the entire assault, calling out movements, anticipating enemy ambushes, and using the ship's layout to their advantage. At one junction, the Draviks attempted a pincer maneuver, flanking from both sides. The Velker fired first, but their energy blasts were too slow. The Zarathians charged, but the enemy was faster. Then a human squad slid into position, weapons locked and ready. "Suppressing fire," Ramirez shouted. A hail of precise shots ripped into the Dravik's flank. Not wild, panic firing, but calculated bursts, hitting weak points in their armor. The Dravik's warriors staggered, their assault crumbling. Karath watched in shock. These humans weren't just good fighters, they were masterful tacticians. Every movement was calculated, every shot intentional. They didn't fight for honor. They didn't fight for pride. They fought to win. Command deck siege. The final stretch was the hardest. The command deck was heavily fortified, with Dravik's warriors entrenched inside. A frontal assault would be suicide. Suggestions? Graves asked, glancing at his team. A human engineer, Sergeant Liu, grinned. Well, their security overrides are sloppy. If we reroute power from auxiliary systems, we could trigger a temporary gravity shift inside the command deck. Graves raised an eyebrow. How long? 30 seconds of 0G, Liu said. Maybe more if I get creative. Graves smirked. Do it. Minutes later, the assault began. The Draviks were prepared for a charge. They were not prepared for their gravity to suddenly vanish. As the security systems overloaded, the Draviks floated helplessly, their bulky armor making them slow and clumsy. The humans? They had magnetic boots. Moving like predators in water, the humans stormed the command deck, taking precise, controlled shots. The Draviks, disoriented, never stood a chance. Within seconds, the battle was over. The aftermath. With the command deck secured, the ship's defenses were re-enabled. Auto turrets came online, sealing off breaches. The remaining Dravik's forces, realizing their invasion had failed, fled into the void. The warship was theirs again. In the silence that followed, the various species turned to face the humans. They had expected strength to win the day. Instead, they had watched strategy triumph over raw power. Karath, his pride bruised, but his respect earned, finally spoke. You are not the strongest species in the galaxy, he said slowly. Graves smiled. Never said we were. Karath nodded, his expression unreadable. No, but you may be the most dangerous. The humans had sat in the back because they knew something the others did not. It wasn't about being first in a battle. It was about making sure you were the last one standing. The lesson. The command deck of the Zarathian warship was now silent, save for the hum of restored systems and the quiet breathing of battle-worn survivors. The Draviks had been defeated, their invasion force repelled. But the real battle, the one that mattered most, was only just beginning. Colonel Ethan Graves stood at the center of the deck, his uniform streaked with grime and blood. Around him, the most powerful species in the galaxy had gathered, processing what had just happened. The Zarathians, their once proud arrogance cracked, but not shattered, stood with their heads high, trying to regain their dignity. The Jorvans, massive and brutish, flexed their claws, still eager for a fight despite their losses. The Velker, ever calculating, examined the battle data on their hollow displays, analyzing human tactics with an almost unnerving fascination. And the humans? They just waited. Graves could feel the weight of their gazes. He could hear the unspoken question hanging in the air, heavy with meaning. How had they done it? How had the weakest species in the room walked away as the victors? General Karath, his massive frame still tense from battle, finally broke the silence. You knew, he said, his deep voice rumbling through the chamber. You knew an attack was coming. Graves shook his head. Not exactly, but we knew something could happen. Karath's brow furrowed. And yet you did nothing? No warning? No alert? Graves smirked. Would you have listened? The room fell silent. Karath's fists clenched, but he did not deny it. No one would have listened to the humans. No one ever did, until it was too late. Why humans sit in the back? Graves exhaled, running a hand through his sweat-matted hair. He had spent his entire career explaining this lesson to those who thought strength was only muscle and firepower. Most never understood. But maybe, just maybe, they would listen now. You all fight with pride, Graves said, his voice steady, measured. You stand at the front because you believe strength means being seen. That power is about being first into the fight. His eyes flicked over the assembled warriors, each of them watching, listening. We don't fight like that, he continued. We sit in the back because that's where you can see everything, where you can learn, where you can adapt. The Velker ambassador tilted her head, her glowing eyes narrowing. Adaptability. That is your advantage. Graves nodded. Humans don't have the biggest guns, the strongest bodies, or the most advanced tech. But we know how to fight smart. And that means we don't rush to the front to prove we're the strongest. We position ourselves where we can control the fight. The Jorvan warlord scoffed. Cowardice. Graves smirked. Survival. A flicker of realization crossed Karatha's face. The battle played back in his mind. The humans' preparation, their positioning, their flawless execution. They hadn't needed to be the strongest. They had simply ensured that when the dust settled, they were the ones still standing. A new respect. For a long moment, no one spoke. The weight of the revelation settled over the room. Then Karath did something no one expected. He stepped forward and extended his massive hand. A gesture of respect. Graves raised an eyebrow, but took the offered handshake. The Zarathian's grip was like an iron vice, but the human didn't flinch. "You have my respect, human," Karath rumbled. "And my caution," Grave chuckled. "I'd expect nothing less." The Velker ambassador inclined her head. "You are more dangerous than we ever realized." "We always were," Ramirez murmured from behind Graves. "You just never noticed." The Jorvans, still grumbling, offered no further insults. Even they understood what had happened here. Humans had just changed the rules of warfare in their eyes, and they would never underestimate them again. The departure. With the warship secured, the summit was officially called to an end. The various delegations prepared to return to their homeworlds, their perspectives forever altered. As the human delegation boarded their shuttle, Ramirez glanced at Graves with a smirk. "So," she said, strapping into her seat, "think they'll invite us back next year?" Graves chuckled as he took his own seat. "Oh, they'll invite us." He gazed out at the Zarathian warship, now a symbol of a lesson hard learned. "They just won't make the mistake of ignoring us ever again." As the shuttle lifted off, leaving behind a room full of the galaxy's strongest species deep in thought, one thing was certain. The humans had made their mark, and they had done it from the back of the room.